guys, I am sitting here with psychologist and Jungian psychotherapist, David Russell. He was also my former university associate professor at university, a good 10 or 15 years ago. I hunted him down so that he could have a bit of a chat to us today, just about a few topics that I feel are current. And David has been the former president of the Jung Society in Sydney, New South Wales.
Sydney, yep.
Yeah, in Sydney. And so I thought there were some topics to do with Jung and perhaps the relevance of Jungian psychotherapy that we can maybe have a little bit of a chat about tonight. Maybe I thought I'd start with the news. I was watching the news. There was I think they called it a sort of a mass murder, family murder last night in Western Australia. And I was just talking to David before this of how this is such an issue, with depression and I don't know, the bigger problem of what's going on in society, in relationships, in families, and I really wanted to see if we could maybe flesh some of that out and how maybe a bit of Jungian psychotherapy, or at least Jungian thoughts and ideas, can maybe help us understand what's going on another level. So David, maybe if you want to tell us a little bit about the distinction between psychology and psychotherapy, because I think a lot of people are familiar with the psychology, and I suppose maybe from a scientific mindset.
That's right.
It's different from psychotherapy.
It came through to our culture in the mid-1800s and began in the laboratory and has maintained that basis ever since. So it looks at the scientific understanding of human experience and animal experience as well. Psychotherapy, the word therapy is an old Greek word, and it meant one's attitude or disposition when you were preparing yourself to enter a temple. And so in the Greek tradition, there was a temple for the various gods and goddesses. And so each temple represented an emotion. So you would prepare yourself to address some sort of distress, whether it was in love or in anger or health, and that would be the temple you'd go to. So preparing yourself would be the therapia. And so psychotherapy then emphasizes the disposition or attitude we have to the big questions in life. And today, a lot is talked about attitude and attachment theory and how we start off in life and then how we manage the various ups and downs of our emotional distress. And some people do that much better than others. And so the crisis, that event in Western Australia, catastrophic business, clearly has a long history. And it's not the beginning of the distress, I'm sure. And men of all ages in our culture, but maybe in every culture, have a tendency to use violence when they're distressed, to destroy. So that is where our culture and our civilization plays an important part, to help equip men to have other ways of managing their distress.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a big topic, isn't it? I mean, I guess maybe not just men, obviously, but the feeling of anxiety and I guess depression, but we often try and medicate it, don't we, through I guess psychiatric means.
Especially these days when it's so available. Yeah. Medication is readily available. And it's too easy to think that the medication will do the job, but the evidence is that it doesn't very often do the job. At best, it helps us through a crisis. I'm talking about psychological distress here, not physical problems. But psychological distress is a learned thing. We learn how to manage over years, to manage the things that upset us most. And sometimes we learn very awkward things, bad habits. And then that takes time to change, and we need to trust, and we need to believe that it's worth changing. So the medication can't do anything like that. It can assist in a crisis to keep going, which is not too bad, but often it doesn't do that either.
I mean, do you feel that it's perhaps a band-aid solution in some instances, but that...
It's too readily used. It's too easy to obtain. There are too many doctors writing scripts. It's presented as the gold standard, something akin to the magic bullet. You don't have to be distressed, you don't have to be depressed or anxious. Now we have this pharmaceutical solution, and it's not a solution. It's just clearly not a solution. And people who do all the research and those who have suffered depression and anxiety now are writing books and just expressing their experience, and invariably they talk about the importance of psychotherapy.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I found myself doing the Masters in Analytical Psych so many years ago, was I felt that there was a gap or a void or a place where the soul and the psyche wasn't being allowed space or room to be heard or to show itself. And it's quickly, well, I'm not sure, probably in one of your talks you mentioned possibly another author or writer who said, well, that psychiatrists were often seen as psychological mechanics, that you would just look up the hood and see and give a diagnosis and see whether, the oil needed topping up, and just to fix that. And it's not sort of that black and white, is it?
It doesn't work like that, no. Especially the more complex issues, and those ones that have this, you mentioned soul, have a soul quality. We can't see the soul. We can talk about experiences that have a quality of soul, and we are able to say, I met someone and I feel we can be soul buddies. Or even in a room, you can walk into a room and you can say, this room has soul. So it's a quality we experience, but it's not easily measurable. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so Jungian psychology or Jungian psychotherapy tries to work with the subtle experiences of mind-body, mind-body spirit, and it particularly honours our longing for a relationship, not just any relationship, but deeply satisfying relationships with our other humans in our immediate surrounds, but also professionally and also environmentally, and in terms of the stages through life. So the soul asks different things of us, if we like. In a poetic manner we can speak like this. When we're young, when we're an adolescent, when we're an adult, young adult, middle-aged, older person, the soul asks different things. And we have to attune ourselves to listen. What is the soul asking of me at this particular time of my life? So that's the more Jungian attitude. To have a relationship with yourself, with your inner life, is highly valued.
Yeah, it is. It's having that inner dialogue or having a discourse with the self, and not, I guess, trying to demonize or pathologize the qualities that aren't as endearing or positive, but just engaging in possibly the more challenging aspects.
And that is particularly relevant, I think. Someone like Carl Jung, who spoke about the archetypes, particularly mentioned the shadow archetype. And it's most noticeable when you look at the opposite. When someone stands in all their glory, if you like, in the sun, that person casts a bigger shadow. And the shadow is unconscious. It's an unconscious driver, a force. And we don't want to know about it because we actually like the sense of standing in the sun and aspiring for enlightenment or individuation, wholeness.
Yeah.
And so we walk towards the light. We love the light. However, the shadow is there. And the more we walk towards the light, the more powerful the shadow is. And the shadow is a force that we need to recognize within ourselves. So it's archetypal in that sense. Because we're kidding ourselves if we only believe that walking towards the light and achieving and aspiring for the fresh air of the mountaintop is going to work for us. We need the dark, moist valley, which is more shadow quality, that we don't often go to because it's moist, misty, we can't see our way, the light is not good. Yeah. But we learn different things about ourselves which are essential. And so the shadow, you mentioned the demonizing, often it is, we demonize the parts of our psyche we don't like.
Yeah.
They cause us problems and we'd love to overcome them, get rid of them. But actually we need to engage and ask the internal dialogue you mentioned.
Yeah.
What am I not doing? What am I doing too much of? How is the shadow force impinging on me outside of my awareness? But now I see the consequences and thus I need to take notice.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that this shadow is often overlooked or underrated, or people don't go there. It's scary. They don't.
Well, it's an unconscious force too.
Yeah.
We can think we know what our shadow side is, but it's only after careful inner interrogation, inner work, that we recognize, we bring to consciousness what this driving force is.
Yeah.
So it's easy to kid ourselves that, yeah, I know I've got a few faults, that's sort of kidding ourselves. I know I do too much of this and too little of that. And I know, but they're bad habits.
Yeah.
That's not the shadow. The shadow is a deep, primal force that wants us to be both aspiring to walk to the top of the mountain and entering into the dark valley. Not at the one time, but to be able to have an ability, a capacity to do both.
Yeah.
We need to do both, and we have to almost be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the shadow side. Such is our avoidance.
Because the confrontation with the shadow isn't always pleasant, is it? It's quite...
It's hard work.
It's definitely a Herculean effort.
And it's usually comes through a crisis.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I wanted to bring that up because in terms of the crisis being a gateway to a deeper spiritual awakening, maybe we can come back to the shadow, because I wanted to speak about that from a global perspective of what's going on socio-politically and how everyone is projecting and they're sitting on a polar opposite of someone else or some other ideology or some other cause. But from the crisis perspective, is it possibly a gateway? What would you say is a distinction or difference between depression, like maybe perhaps clinical depression, and the dark night of the soul? Is one biological, neurological, and one is more spiritual? How do you define that?
They're very much different aspects of complex human experience. So depression, whether it's deep psychotic depression or anxiety, depression, is how mind-body responding. It's a consequence of something not right, something going wrong. Going wrong's the best way to put it, because that means that we might have a genetic predisposition for being pessimistic. We might have inherited models, if you like, parents, grandparents who were obviously depressed, and that was their way of working through their difficulties. The sort of depression that is hellish and seems to destroy everything we've held dear, it's very hard to understand, and we have to listen very carefully to what it might be trying to tell us. Otherwise, depression, like we say now, we have an epidemic of depression, which is a ridiculous statement, I find, because it's calling everything, every human distress, a depression. And it's too easily then trying to relate it to neurological imbalance, serotonin effect or ill effect. That's too easy. We know very little about the nervous system, and the nervous system is only one aspect of our makeup anyway. So it's important to listen carefully to the person's experience always, no matter what the depression is like. Tell me more about your experience. And it's not just a matter of the highlights of the experience, it's how is this person working with themselves as they experience going through life. And how did they, as a younger person, learn to work with difficulty, with emotional fluctuation. So there's that aspect there, which is our human experience. Then there's this other quality. You mentioned the dark night of the soul. It is this capacity we have to make meaning and not make meaning. They seem to be two sides of the same coin, experience, because we can't make meaning of everything. There are mysteries in life that deny us easy understanding, let alone an explanation. But we try really hard. And that phrase, dark night of the soul, when we use it, we refer to a Spanish mystic, John of the Cross was his name. And he wrote about it. He wrote about the stages of spiritual growth. And as one moves through those stages, one experiences the dark night of the senses, so that the senses are our vehicles to engage with the world. And we trust them. We need to trust them. So the dark night of the senses is when they don't work for us anymore. We lose trust in our senses. But it gets worse. Then comes the dark, once we pass through that stage, comes the dark night of the soul. And that's where nothing makes sense. And we have to embrace, one has to, John of the Cross spoke about this, embrace the unknown and unknowable. But it's a new form of knowing. So this is the paradox, if you like, of the word. We have to be okay about not being able to make sense and not having in any way to comfort us, in his case, the divine, who he was moving to embrace, to engage with deeply, no longer there. Silence has disappeared, the divine, from his life. And so he's left without any sense of where do I place my trust. So in a way, there are many common elements in that experience and the deep depression. But we attribute the origins of it to different places. Now, clinically one could say John of the Cross was deeply depressed. But that's a bit pointless. Equally pointless, or it's too easy to say someone with a deep depression is spiritually, has a deep spiritual longing that is unsatisfied. Again, that's coming in with an interpretation.
Yeah.
On each occasion, we've got to listen to or invite the experience. Tell me about the experience. Tell me what's happening. Tell me how you're working with it or not working with it. Help me understand how you're making sense of all of this or not making sense. So therapeutically, we do much the same. And to my mind, there is the common ground, if you like, here, is human experience in all its complexity. And we naively think, our life is a trajectory, pretty straight line of different ages and stages. But psychologically, I don't think that makes much sense. Really, it's a going around and around, and we have emotional waves coming in on top of us. Then the waves abate, and another big wave comes in, and we long to have some understanding, some religion that will save us and make sense of it all. But in this secular age, that is not working very well at all.
Yeah, it's like trying to find a footing or some anchor point or mooring or a frame of reference when it's all been sort of stripped away from us or chipped away, or perhaps the pillars are starting to come away and fall loose.
Well, the easy answers are, that's right. We have the sort of education we receive now, critical understanding of historical events, of the big issues of life and death. They don't give comfort to an easy understanding, an easy acceptance of a religious belief in a literal sense. I mean, what religion has given us is deep cultural wisdom, distilled over centuries, thousands of years in some cases, of good living. And it works very well in small communities that are stable. We don't have those anymore. And we have a belief system that values, maybe overvalues human autonomy and overvalues cynicism. And so we need, I think, another attitude, another therapia towards the big religions, and to have a more poetic attitude to them. What can I learn? What can I bring to and take from this rich tradition that will work for me, psychologically speaking, in my inner life? So Jungian psychology is not about rejecting traditions. It doesn't want to take anyone on board, literally. It wants to see the spirit there as poetic more than literal. It wants to be able to say an individual's inner life, their psyche, is a very reliable judge of what's important for that person as an individual. But if you like, the shadow side of Jungian psychology is its lack of reference to the community.
Yeah.
So it's too individualistic. It's too autonomous. It needs, well, the shadow there is there, like relationship building, community, especially at key points in our life, undervalued in its absence.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, the community aspect, because in this digital age of social media connection, where we're constantly on the phone, on one hand, we have the world at our fingertips, and our attention span is constantly.
It's a very superficial world at our fingertips.
And yet,
We
there's loneliness.
we can't. Well, and that's why it's the evidence is it's so superficial. It leads to loneliness because it is so horizontal in its appeal. We move the same horizontal in the same horizontal space. Some of this, some of that, more of that. It doesn't offer anything vertical. No depth. So it looks like it's giving us knowledge, but it's just noise. Most of the time it's noise, and it's noise shaped by commerce, money, and the verticality that it's missing is it cannot offer deep satisfaction. It cannot give us this soul quality. It can give words that sound like that and images that look beautiful, but the depth is not there where we feel a shiver up the back and are connected deeply to person or place or imagination even. That's the soul quality.
So do you believe that the connection, a community needs to be somewhat in the physical as opposed to merely virtual?
I think so. That's certainly my strong hypothesis because
that deep connection has to be flesh.
It has to be fleshy. It has to have the ability to touch and be touched. Otherwise, it's what I'm calling horizontal. It's superficial. It's off the surface. And we get bored with that. We get bored. And then when we get bored, we get lonely. And so the ordinariness of the hand on the face or smelling someone's hair and staying there long enough for the experience to go right through the body, that's soulful. That's what you can't get in the current fashion of media usage.
And I guess that that isolation, the undercurrent of it is just so pervasive. It feels you don't think that would be the case, that everyone seems to be connected, or
seems to be connected. That's right. And there's stuff happening.
Yes.
Big stuff happening. It's seemingly important stuff, and in some respects it is important, but it's of that level. And it cons us or seduces us into thinking that's enough. It's very complex. The vertical one is very complex as we move through the different layers of emotional challenge, really. Because we don't get our needs met. Whereas the surface one is very good at offering you what your needs are.
The quick fix.
Quick fix. The vertical one is really difficult. Yeah. We've got to learn to say no. We've got to learn to say, I want. My heart says I need. And there's no guarantee anything else is going to be delivered to you. Like no one is saying, yes, I'm here to listen. So we have to, and this is where we have to draw the imagination in our own, this capacity we have for our imagination and our own spiritual life, bring all those things to the party and express them as best we can. Bring words to them, actions to them in our little community.
In our own little world, in our own little
That's right. That's right. And to ourselves in particular. So we have to do this with ourselves. We do it with our family, our close friends, and in some fashion we do it out there as well. Some little fashion.
I mean, I suppose there has been sort of this, I don't know, in the last decade, I'm just going to use that time frame, but possibly in the last few years, and I don't know if being online has contributed to, it does seem, again, that there are so many instances of people being in these states. I'm just going to use these wide terms, you know, these states of depression and anxiety and anger and turmoil and you know, you sort of liken it to seasons of life as we all go through the ups and downs, and there's different stages and phases, but it seems particularly intense. The waves seem to be more intense than maybe
Yes,
a decade
that's
ago.
probably so. Well, I think we're more on our own now, which is the irony of the mass communication. But loneliness is big at the moment. It's as an experience, a lot of people are lonely, really deeply lonely. And this is not because they haven't got a job, they haven't got a family. They often have all those things.
Yeah.
But loneliness, and so we have to ask, what is this experience of loneliness? What is it telling us about what's happening? What is it telling us about the human spirit? Because something is missing.
Yes.
There's too much of some stuff, and there's other stuff missing big time.
Yeah.
And maybe expectations have been created in the last, you mentioned a period, 20 or 30 years, that one shouldn't be lonely. You know, an expectation, one shouldn't get anxious when they have to wait, or if they don't succeed in some task they've set themselves. Somehow expectations were created that this shouldn't happen, which is ridiculous. It happens all the time. And so we are now living in a time of failed expectations. And it's like coming up from the bottom and surfacing. And it shows itself in depression, anxiety, loneliness, loss of purpose, desire for whatever, needing to have the desire, I should have that, I could have that.
Yeah.
There's no reason why I shouldn't have that or couldn't have that. That sort of attitude gets us into big trouble, us humans.
Yes, I mean, I recall you had a talk about desires and compulsions, and I think that you mentioned that archetypal anxiety and creative illness, is one just another side of the other? Because Jung went through his own period of depression. He called it the dark night of the sea or something.
Yeah, something like, that's right.
And it went for 5 years.
Yes, big time.
So.
And one can think that he did his best work
During that time
and afterwards, when he stopped reading other people's works, and did the internal dialogue. And I think, I'm just imagining this, but because we don't actually know, he had to let go of some dreams he had for himself and pursue what he then defined as his own psychological life, and where was that drawing him? To what work was that drawing him? And he seemed to have turned a bit of a corner there and started to pursue a much more developed inner life. And so he looked at the big books, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and Kundalini Yoga, and Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and the list goes on and on. Alchemy. Wow, he really, because he was trying to see what other traditions had done when they looked at their inner life, the spirit life, because he wanted to use those to somehow validate or amplify his own inner life. He wasn't looking there for answers, because he felt he had those for himself, but he wanted to stay true to himself. And it's very interesting, I think, that he found validation in those ancient texts about his journey, the way he was doing his own journey.
And that's interesting that there seems to be this commonality that's apparent across different cosmologies, different traditions, different periods of time even, just that there seems to be the genesis maybe, or a numinous sort of seed or a kernel.
Yep. It's our human condition. It's us. And when we explore our deep human experience, lo and behold, we come up with something similar to what people were doing 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And the needs seem to be the same. And so this is the notion of the archetypal forces is simply that. It's that we come into the world predisposed in certain ways to do and not do certain things. So these forces shape us. They're like a template that frames our human experience. And if we ignore them totally, we seem to get into terrible strife.
Yes, I think there has been some influence to try and, streamline us or distill wisdom or knowledge into a bite-sized chunk, packaged in a bottle. And
That's right. And that's been the problem with the New Age movement, and the problem in taking literally any of the faith traditions. It doesn't seem to satisfy. We have to engage in the personal challenge, struggle. I think that's the best term for it.
Yeah.
The personal struggle, and we don't do it though in an isolated way. We do it like we're doing now. We do it by talking about it. We do it by sharing the ups and downs of it. We do it by ritual and ceremony and recollecting the family through all its turmoil and saying we've got something here worth celebrating. These occasions matter. We just can't dismiss all of this, because we do so at our peril. But then we have to create something new, but it typically doesn't work.
I mean, there does seem to be this sort of chaos in the world at the moment, on different levels. It's sort of like a global existential crisis, but maybe that's always been there in different forms, but it's
magnified.
It's
magnified now, in many respects. It's magnified in big music festivals. It's magnified in the social media. The use of psychedelic or psychoactive drugs.
Right.
People wanting an off-the-shelf method or recipe to enhance their life, but they only want to have the enhancement, then get on with it, and not really to do the hard work of engaging and deep understanding and trial and error and working with the unknown.
It's like you want the hit when
you want the hit. That's right. And then you want it over. And so we have this thing now, like, death. We don't talk about death, we just want death. The dying, which is the experience, is never much talked about. So this can be quite a long or short period of actually letting go, of dying, of celebrating life. No, we'll talk about death, the moment of death, or the time after death, or whether one gets medical help to die or something like that. But it's about ending, like
Yeah.
life to be lived in like a great experiment, and then when time comes to end it, and that's it. It just seems an impoverished appreciation of the richness of life. Yeah.
It is. It's such an important rite of passage, like many other stages of life, I guess. But it's one that's, unless you've sort of been right at the precipice of seeing someone pass over, or which I'm sure, I don't know who hasn't in this world not been there, but it's, and I know that we've spoken about it previously, where I have tended to watch a lot of different films. It's almost as if I'm preparing for the passing of those close to me, but that I will not be able to contain it, so I'm letting it go gradually.
That's the important thing, is learning how to die. That's right. It is a project in itself. Yeah, it's.
And in doing so, you're learning how to live, aren't you?
That's the beauty.
It's the dance.
That's the dance. That's right. And it's a gift to the community somehow. See, so much emphasis is placed on the autonomy of the individual that we don't often think about the flourishing community. How can a community flourish? What is a community? What are the constituent elements of a community, and how to make those flourish? And all the key human experiences are part of that flourishing, including, maybe especially, the dying one. And so to give a gift to the community in whatever manner, at whatever phase of life, is part of the community life. And we need to revisit this whole community building thing.
I agree. I think this sense of belonging is lost.
Yeah.
Like true, real belonging. And, you know, you can have people in your immediate family and circle of friends that you've known for a long time, or work colleagues, and yet there maybe is a disconnect because the souls aren't necessarily communicating.
That's
or
right.
Understanding each other.
It's just negotiating how to get on.
Exactly. I feel like there are a lot of transactional relationships happening, and they seem more business oriented. It's like, well, it's unspoken, but it's like, well, I'll do this in the hope that at some later stage it'll be reciprocated.
That's something like that.
And that's what the ties people together, whereas for those lucky and privileged enough to find real, true, deep soul connections within community, they are able to appreciate a deeper sense of belonging. And that's sort of, I feel that's getting away from us. I mean, I know that happens in certain communities. I know I have friends that live in spiritual communities, but they're in their own echo chamber, or you know, and as long as they're in their happy little bubble, doesn't the outside world, well, yeah, whatever's happening.
That's right.
But then the minute you do step out, if you're a deeply compassionate, empathic person, it can send you bonkers, because while sometimes I really feel the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and it's like, well, yeah, maybe we'll just crawl back into my little cave for a few years. It's quite
a challenge to live in the world as fully as we're capable. It's an important one, though, because the world, no matter what is out there, is not the enemy. We can't afford to project the enemy out there. You know, we have to, what do I ask ourselves? To bring that projection, reel it back in. The problem is not out there, no matter how gross it might look, because we're powerless to act there in a big sense. But in a little sense, we can withdraw that projection and say, what do I need to do? How do I show love, compassion to the people around me? And how do I make a statement of where we as a little community can place our trust? This is what we've always done as human beings. Because out there's always been awful stuff. if we lived in a little village, it would be over the mountain, there'd be big trouble, and we're always at risk of being attacked or us attacking them or something like that. So we learn to value our spiritual life, our material life, our emotional life, and to celebrate it, and to realize that each time we project our problem, or that's a terrible person over there, or that's a terrible thing that's happening over there, and it is, but to take that on ourselves and think, something, that means that my life is useless. No. We have to draw up from the earth our strength. We place our trust in our capacity to love and do compassion, show compassion. That's what we do. That's what we keep doing. And the world goes on. And good stuff happens and awful stuff happens. It's not like there's a progression of evolution where we are getting better and better at things. I don't know, I don't see much evidence of that really. I think we're always on the edge. And the edge is about holding our civilization and our ability to communicate and our ability to love and value. It's always so fragile.
Yeah.
And it always has been fragile.
Yeah.
And no matter what walls one builds around the city or the community, they don't mean much actually.
Yes, well there's the projection that you're talking about, it seems to be so rife on the global stage now,
Yes.
in every arena possible.
Yes.
And I mean, if you want to look at world leaders, if you want to look at celebrities, if you want
It's
to
a
look
distraction, isn't it?
it is a distraction, but also I see that the stronger the projection, the more individually you're inclined to not look within.
That's right.
Because
you get sucked in.
Yeah, it's easier to put it on someone else.
That's right.
See it in someone else.
And that's right. And say terrible things. Terrible things are happening. What a terrible person that is.
I mean, that's not to say that we don't call out,
Of course.
of abuse
When
or
we
anything
see
like
it,
that.
of course.
But we also have a duty within our own frame to look within to see what part we
Precisely.
can play.
Yep.
And, what impact or influence we
Yes.
have. And I don't know whether it's my last decade with Jung that has allowed me to really navigate that terrain of doing the inner shadow work, the critical work, and it's an ongoing process and it's not easy. And the more but I don't know what it is, the more you do the work, the more you see it being played out, like as an observer.
Yes,
and
you can.
it's
That's
horrific.
right. Yes.
And how do you, as a person that has perhaps navigated these areas, try and, in your own way, in your own integrity, with your own essence, try and send out a little ripple in the
It
world?
is a little ripple, and there's...
Amongst all these egos
That's right.
that are trying to change the world. And
But I have this mantra, where do I place my trust in terms of what can happen and what needs to happen? And I have to place it in my own integrity, body, mind, spirit, integrity, and say, let me work on that, let me get that in place, and then act with that or through that in whatever I do. And to meander my way through all this chaos out there, and I read the paper and I watch a bit of telly as well. I quite like action movies and things as well as other movies. But I'm out there and I'm listening and I'm trying to understand in a little way, so they are little waves, to use your expression, very little waves. The way I work with people, it's very gentle and tiny little impacts. But I don't know any other way. I think some people do have the capacity to be world leaders. I'm not one of those. But they stand in the light. We go back to the shadow notion.
Yes.
And we have to feel compassion for them because their shadow is huge.
Yes.
And they have trouble, serious trouble, right around them all the time. So if we keep I admire people who do that well, but not many can do it well without their shadow overwhelming them. Mm. So for me personally, I like to keep a little bit of sunlight around me, a recognition that that won't cast too big a shadow. Mm. But when I know I'm in a crisis, I know the shadow is moving me.
Yeah.
And I've got to do something.
Got to listen.
Yeah, I've got to listen carefully.
Sort of like got to slow down and it's like, whoops, okay, all right. It's
That's
like
right.
everything becomes heightened at that point. And I think what getting back to our very beginning of what's happening is when these crises tend to happen with people within families and their relationships, they're sort of instantly reacting this to whatever is happening.
Yes.
And those reactions tend to have consequences.
Huge, awful consequences.
Yeah.
So that's the impulse. I mean, that if the notion is, if you're not open to the shadow is going to overwhelm you, and it will control, if you like, in an impulsive way.
And they're like addictions.
Addictions.
To,
violence,
gambling,
brutality.
Pornography.
That's right. All there.
Things.
All there. That's right.
And they do cast big shadows. And this is why I think the community, I see where I work every week, dealing with families going through crises, parents and kids, and sometimes I'll be briefly after the visits are over talking to the parents in the car park.
Yes.
And they're not in great state. They're not in great state.
No.
And it's very disheartening because I feel like we can do something. Each and every single one of us.
Something little.
Something little. It could just be a touch on the shoulder.
The Buddhist notion of compassion
Yeah.
is fantastic. As a gesture, as a word, if it's genuinely meant, if it's a free gift, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I feel like people just need to be heard
and respected as a human being of value.
Everyone.
Everyone is a human being of value. Everyone, without exception, a human being of value. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to touch then maybe on when you're seeing your clients and you're being present and engaging with what they come to you for. So when they present as a situation, it's not often that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, but that's not the real, not always, not often. There's the underlying deeper root. And do you find that that's what really, once you get to the crux of that, you kind of get to the heart of that, and once the layers get peeled?
It's a relationship. It's a relationship, yeah. It's both parties, both myself and the person sitting opposite. Two human beings, each with a history. My skill is to listen carefully as I explore their experience and help them express their experience. And what are the forces affecting their experience, past and present? Because the notion of psychodynamic psychology is about the forces. What desires are moving you? What desires are being blocked? have never been expressed? How have you worked to learn to survive through thick and thin? So that's my life history, the person opposite's life history. And I say quite clearly, this has to work for both of us in as much as it's a mutual experience. I can't just, as you mentioned, unpeel the layers. We have to together create something, a third. We co-create that. And we place our trust, if you like, in our capacity to do that. And
it's the alchemical crucible.
in a way it is, that's right. It's still a good image. The alchemical crucible is a good image. And it takes a long time to make any sense of progress. But maybe we drop the word progress and look at acceptance, validation, respect and honouring of shared humanity. This seems to be a great thing.
Do you find that as you, I was going to use the word progress, but as you proceed, as you continue, do you find the dance or the delicate, precarious nature of not being codependent or not having that, I guess in Jungian terms or psychological terms, transference and counter-transference, there's that element, that interplay. At what point do you feel that the patient, the client is, okay, you're at a place where off you go now?
Yeah, that happens at all different places.
Yeah.
There's no quantifiable sort of pattern here. It's more a quality thing than a quantity thing. So some people come once, twice, 10 times, 20 times, and I don't know if it matters. Because we have to work with ourselves. This is the key foundational element is, I think Jung used the words, psyche will heal itself if all that artificial, like the ego, gets out of the way.
Yeah.
And so a person learning to value themselves can happen very quickly because they always did, but felt they weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
And then somehow they get permission. Oh, right. I can actually value my experience. I can trust my experience. My experience is actually foundational for me. Wow. Other times it's not that straightforward.
There's that simple act of just allowing themselves to be here or to go to see someone is a shift, is a huge shift.
It is.
In itself.
And if they can see that this person can only ever walk alongside them, can never actually help them, but by walking alongside them, then they can begin to trust themselves and trust their capacities, their emotional capacity, or their capacity for their emotional life, their capacity for their intellectual life, their physical, spiritual life. That's what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I guess because of the hustle and bustle and fast pace of day-to-day living, people are on that. Well, like I just want to heal and get on with it, like you say.
Yeah.
How do we say, look, no, it's okay to take time out?
Yeah.
But then
If
you have a prolonged dark night of the soul that lasts 5 years, how do you engage in that dance on a day-to-day level?
I think most people, part of that, in some manner, within their own psyche, they believe that this is a tough journey. That they might express, I want something done quickly. I want to get rid of this depression. I want to get back to work the way I was, 6 months ago. But part of them knows that that can't be the case, that this has to be somewhat of a turning point. Things have to be done differently. Different attitude, different therapy is required here. And so I think it's interesting that most people get it. If they can open themselves to what their inner voice might be suggesting to them. And so it does require, you're dead right, you've got to have quiet moments. You've got to have some way, whether it's doing the gardening or the washing or something or other, where you let things percolate up and you look at them and you consider, and then the emotion of love. We can't avoid talking about this capacity we have to deepen the experience with other people and with ourselves, and we call it love. We have to keep nurturing that. And some people haven't bothered for a while.
Yeah.
But often the flame is there, it just needs to be rekindled.
Yeah, it is interesting to behold, to observe in yourself and to observe in people close to you, and there's always this wanting to offer help, but then also you know that when a butterfly has to come out of its cocoon, you can't go and peer its thing open. It's got to
spot on.
Got to
Yeah,
burst out of its own.
exactly.
Tempered own, as you mentioned in one of your talks. I think there's that resistance, to hold back because it's that person's journey or that person's lesson. But at what point do you step in if it's starting to spiral and you think, well, if I don't step in, this could be really horrific.
That's true. That's true. That's the business of communication, isn't it?
And
of
I
an
think
ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and I suppose with what we're getting at with the Jungian, how Jungian therapy can be relevant today is maybe not to have this rushed, well, that's quick fix, I'll go and see the doctor and get my next hit of Prozac and Adderall and Retinol.
If you do that, you do it infrequently. I mean, we are humans, we're going to do the wrong thing, but we try to do it infrequently. We try to learn. And the Jungian, if you like, paradigm offers a way of deepening your everyday experience, offers a language of reflection, if you like.
Yes.
A few aspects to consider on the journey. There's nothing marvellous about it other than just that.
Well, I mean, it has the spiritual and the philosophical and the psychological.
That's right. It tries to integrate.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what it espouses. That's right. Trust in the whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, it's just been so much more richer and vaster and complex.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Jungian community has sort of kind of been, I guess, ostracized from mainstream psychology.
Oh, totally.
Because they're seen as
weirdos.
Wackery.
Yeah. That's right.
But for those that have,
and it's not tightly measurable or empirical.
Yeah.
And so we have to accept that. I like both. I like that's been part of my background. Good research I value, but good research, not just research. Good research, richness of human experience, and then this mysterious quality that we call soul. And the Jungian one tries to integrate that into all the rest.
Yeah. I think that one little thing that's missing may be in fact the key to alleviating some of that.
It could be.
angst,
It could be.
that connection, deeper
It could.
connection
It
with
could
soul.
be. But it needs to be a discipline. Man, this is the hard
And
work.
this is the hard,
It's a
yeah.
discipline.
How do you discipline a connection?
Well, that's right. I think we can't avoid we can't avoid the philosophy in practice.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to piggyback on all sorts of others, but then fashion their own as a practice that gives strength to the emotional inner core.
Yeah. Well, maybe we might have to give it a go and see if David will do a special little holding class for a group of men one day. But there's so much to unpack with Jung. I mean, maybe I'll have another session with David and unravel some of all the other concepts. But it's been so wonderful to catch up with David again. And if you're interested, if you're in Sydney at all, his practice is located in the CBD. So I'll put his details down at the bottom of this video if you want to get in contact with David. But David, thank you so much for
It's been a
spending the
pleasure.
evening with me.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure,
you.
Fina. Good. Thank you.